The old wooden chair creaked as Mary sat down at the small table in her rented room. Outside her window, the busy streets of Boston buzzed with life, but inside, everything felt quiet and heavy. She held the matrimonial newspaper in her hands, the same one she had read 100 times before. At 32 years old, Mary knew she was running out of choices. The landlady, Mrs. Henderson, had made it clear just 3 days ago. "You have 2 weeks to find the rent money or you'll need to find somewhere else to live," she had said, her voice sharp as a knife. Mary's fingers traced the worn fabric of her only good dress. Working as a seamstress barely brought in enough money to buy food, let alone pay for a room in the boarding house. She had tried to find other work, but jobs for unmarried women were hard to come by. Most people looked at her with pity or suspicion when they learned she was a widow with no children. The memory of her first marriage still hurt. David had been a kind man, but their 3 years together had been marked by one disappointment after another. No babies came, despite their hopes and prayers. When the doctor finally told them the truth, that Mary would never be able to have children, David had tried to be understanding. But she could see the sadness in his eyes every time he looked at other families. When David died in a factory accident, Mary thought her life was over. That was 5 years ago, and since then she had been completely alone. Her parents had passed away when she was young, and she had no brothers or sisters to turn to. She opened the newspaper again and looked at the section she knew by heart. Matrimonial advertisements, it said at the top. Dozens of men from across the country had placed ads looking for wives. Most of them were farmers or ranchers from places she had never heard of. Mary had already answered 3 of these advertisements. Each time she had written careful letters trying to present herself in the best possible way. And each time, when she honestly told them about her condition, the letters had stopped coming. The silence was always the same, crushing and final. She was about to close the newspaper when one advertisement caught her eye. It was different from the others. Most men wrote things like seeking young, healthy wife for farming partnership, or want woman to bear strong sons. But this one was different. Widowed rancher in Montana. Territory seeks woman of good character to help care for 6 motherless children. Must be patient, kind, and strong. Age and background less important than heart. Write to Robert Collins, Willow Creek Ranch, Bear Valley, Montana Territory. Mary read it 3 times. 6 children, motherless. He wasn't asking for someone to give him babies. He was asking for someone to help raise the ones he already had. She sat back in her chair and thought about it. Montana Territory was so far away she could barely imagine it. She had never been further west than the edge of Massachusetts. The idea of traveling across the entire country to marry a stranger seemed impossible and terrifying. But what choice did she really have? In 2 weeks she would be out on the street with nowhere to go. Winter was coming, and she had seen what happened to women with no family and no money. It wasn't a future she wanted to think about. Mary pulled out a piece of paper and her pen. For a long time she just stared at the blank page. What could she say? How could she explain that she was damaged goods, that she couldn't give this man any children of his own? Finally, she began to write. Dear Mr. Collins, I saw your advertisement in the Boston Herald. I am a widow, 32 years old, and I have been alone for 5 years. I must tell you something important right away, because I have learned it is better to be honest from the start. I cannot have children. The doctors told me this several years ago, and it has caused me great sadness. I know this means you probably will not want to write back to me. Most men want wives who can give them sons and daughters, but if you are truly looking for someone to care for the children you already have, then perhaps my situation would not matter to you. I have worked as a seamstress for many years. I know how to cook and clean and mend clothes. I grew up helping my mother care for my younger cousins, so I am not afraid of children. I am not rich or beautiful, but I am honest and hardworking. I believe children need love and patience more than anything else. If you think I might be suitable, please write back. I have very little time to make a decision about my future, as I must leave my current home soon. But I would rather tell you the truth now than disappoint you later. Respectfully yours, Mary Sullivan. She read the letter 5 times before she was satisfied. Her hand shook a little as she folded it and put it in an envelope. The postage would cost her money she could barely spare, but she had to try. As she walked to the post office, Mary tried not to think about what would happen if this man rejected her too. The streets were full of people hurrying home to their families to warm dinners and comfortable chairs by the fire. Children ran alongside their mothers, chattering about their day at school. Mary had always imagined she would have that kind of life. When she was young, she had dreamed of a house full of children, of teaching them to read and watching them grow up. When those dreams died, she had never imagined she might find another way to have a family. At the post office, she handed over her letter and her coins. The clerk stamped it and tossed it into a bag with hundreds of other letters. Mary watched it disappear and felt a strange mixture of hope and fear. Walking back to her boarding house, she tried to picture what this Robert Collins might be like. What kind of man raised 6 children alone? What had happened to his wife? Were the children babies or older? Were they well-behaved or wild? She thought about Montana Territory. She had heard it was a place of wide-open spaces and harsh winters. There would be no theaters or shops like in Boston. No neighbors close by, just vast amounts of land under an enormous sky. The idea should have frightened her, but instead she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. It was small and fragile, but it was definitely there. It was hope. That night, Mary lay in her narrow bed and listened to the sounds of the city outside her window. Horses and carriages clattered over the cobblestones. Voices called out from the street below. Somewhere in the distance, a baby was crying. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine a different kind of life, a place where children called her name, where she had purpose beyond just surviving each day, a place where being unable to have children of her own might not matter, because there were already children who needed her. For the first time in 5 years, Mary fell asleep with something other than worry in her heart. She fell asleep wondering if somewhere far away in Montana Territory, a man named Robert Collins might be the answer to prayers she had almost stopped praying. The next morning brought the same routine: work at the dress shop, counting every penny, trying to make her small portions of food last. But now there was something different. Every day she found herself listening for the mail delivery, hoping for a letter that might change everything. She had taken the biggest gamble of her life. Now all she could do was wait and see if honesty and hope would be enough to build a new future in a place she had never seen, with a family she had never met. 3 weeks had passed since Mary sent her letter, and she was beginning to lose hope. Every morning, she asked Mrs. Henderson if any mail had come for her. Every morning, the answer was the same: nothing. Mary had already started looking for other options. She had visited the charity house downtown, where they told her they might have space in 2 months. She had asked at 3 different factories about work, but they all said the same thing. They weren't hiring women right now. Her rent money was almost gone. She had sold her mother's jewelry and her winter coat to buy a little more time, but Mrs. Henderson was getting impatient. Mary could see it in the way the older woman looked at her, like she was already planning who would rent the room next. Then, on a gray Thursday morning in October, everything changed. Mary Sullivan, Mrs. Henderson, called up the stairs. "You've got a letter." Mary's heart jumped into her throat. She ran down the stairs so fast she almost tripped over her own feet. Mrs. Henderson stood in the hallway holding a thick envelope. The handwriting on the front was strong and clear. Mary's hands shook as she took the letter. The return address said R. Collins, Willow Creek Ranch, Bear Valley, Montana Territory. She clutched it to her chest and ran back up to her room. For several minutes, she just sat on her bed holding the envelope. What if it was a rejection? What if he was writing to tell her that her honesty had shocked him, that she was exactly what he didn't want? Finally, she couldn't stand the suspense anymore. She carefully opened the envelope and pulled out 2 pieces of paper. One was a letter. The other looked like some kind of banknote. She unfolded the letter first. "Dear Miss Sullivan, your letter arrived at a time when I had almost given up hope of finding someone who might understand what my family needs. I have placed 3 advertisements for a wife, and each time, the women who responded seemed more interested in starting over fresh than in joining a family that already exists. You wrote that you cannot have children, and you seem to think this would make me reject you. But I must tell you honestly, this is exactly what I was hoping to hear. I already have 6 children, and what they need most is not a new mother to replace the one they lost, but someone who can love them as they are. My wife Caroline died 2 years ago when our youngest was born. Since then, I have tried to keep our family together, but I am failing. My oldest daughter Rebecca is only 14, but she has been trying to mother 5 younger children while I work the ranch. It is too much for a child to handle. My sons have become wild and unruly. The younger girls cry for their mother every night. The baby little William barely knows what a mother's love feels like. I have hired 3 housekeepers in 2 years. All of them left because they said my children were too difficult, too damaged by grief. But I don't believe my children are bad. I believe they are lost and hurting, and they need someone who won't give up on them. Your letter told me you grew up helping with children. More importantly, it told me you understand what it feels like to lose the future you planned and have to build a new one. My children need someone who knows about sadness but hasn't let it make her bitter. I am not a wealthy man, but I can provide a good home. The ranch is successful enough to feed and clothe a family. Montana Territory is rough country, but it is beautiful too. The winters are long and cold, but the summers are like nothing you have ever seen. There are mountains that touch the sky and valleys that go on forever. If you are willing to come, I have enclosed train fare for the journey. It will take you 5 days to reach Bear Valley, changing trains in Chicago and Denver. I know it is a long way from everything you know, but I promise you will not be alone when you arrive. I must warn you that my children will not trust you at first. They have been hurt too much to open their hearts easily. Rebecca especially will test you because she has been protecting her brothers and sisters for so long. But if you are patient, if you show them that you are here to stay, I believe they will learn to love you. I am not asking you to marry a stranger sight unseen. I am asking you to come and meet my family. If we suit each other, we can be married by the preacher in town. If not, I will give you money to return home or to start fresh somewhere else. What do you say, Mary Sullivan? Will you come west and help me save my family? Yours in hope, Robert Collins. Mary read the letter 3 times before she looked at the second piece of paper. It was a bank draft for $50, more money than she had ever held at one time. Enough for train fare across the country and food for the journey with money left over. She sat on her bed in complete shock. He wanted her to come. Not just that. He thought her inability to have children was a good thing. After years of feeling broken and useless, someone saw her exactly as she was and believed she was the answer to his prayers. But as the initial excitement faded, the reality of what he was asking began to sink in. 6 children, 6 motherless, grieving children who had already driven away 3 housekeepers. A 14-year-old girl who had been forced to grow up too fast. Boys who had become wild without proper guidance. A baby who had never known a mother's love. And then there was the place itself. Montana Territory was frontier country. There would be no conveniences, no neighbors nearby if something went wrong. Just her and this man and 6 children in the middle of nowhere. Mary walked to her small window and looked out at the busy Boston street below. In a few hours, she would need to give Mrs. Henderson an answer about the rent. Tomorrow, she would need to decide whether to cash this bank draft and board a train to an unknown future. She thought about the tone of Robert Collins' letter. He hadn't tried to make his situation sound easy. He had been honest about the challenges she would face. But there had been something else in his words. A desperate kind of hope that made her heart ache. She tried to imagine what it must be like for him, trying to run a ranch while raising 6 children alone. Getting up before dawn to do chores, coming home exhausted to find chaos in his house, watching his oldest daughter sacrifice her childhood to help hold the family together. Seeing his younger children struggle with grief they were too young to understand. And she thought about the children themselves. What would it be like to lose your mother and then have stranger after stranger come into your home, promising to care for you, only to leave when things got difficult? How could children that young understand why people kept abandoning them? Mary had never had children of her own, but she remembered what it felt like to be young and scared. When her parents died, she had been 17, old enough to understand death, but young enough to feel completely lost in the world. These children were even younger, and they had already been through so much. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that Robert Collins was right. His children didn't need someone to replace their mother. They needed someone who would choose to love them. Someone who would stay no matter how difficult things became. That evening, Mary sat down and wrote her reply. Dear Mr. Collins, your letter has given me more hope than I have felt in years. Yes, I will come to Montana Territory. I understand that your children may not trust me at first, and I am prepared for that. I know what it feels like to have your heart broken, so I will be patient while they decide whether to let me into theirs. I have very little to bring with me, except a willingness to work hard and a promise that I will not give up on your family, no matter how difficult things become. I have spent 5 years feeling like I had no purpose in this world. You are offering me the chance to matter to someone again. I will leave Boston next Tuesday on the morning train. According to the schedule, I should arrive in Bear Valley the following Sunday afternoon. I am nervous about the journey and about meeting your children, but I am also more excited than I have been in a very long time. Thank you for seeing something in my letter that other men could not see. Thank you for believing that a woman who cannot bear children might still know how to love them. Until we meet, Mary Sullivan. She mailed the letter the next morning, then went home and began packing her few belongings. Mrs. Henderson was shocked when Mary told her she was leaving, but she quickly found another tenant for the room. Mary spent her last few days in Boston walking through the city, saying goodbye to places she had known all her life. She visited the cemetery where David was buried and told him about her decision. She stood outside the dress shop where she had worked and tried to imagine what her life might have been like if she had stayed. But for the first time in years, she wasn't dwelling on the past. She was thinking about the future. Somewhere in Montana Territory, 6 children were waiting to meet her. They didn't know it yet, but she was already starting to love them. On her last night in Boston, Mary lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of the city. Tomorrow she would board a train that would take her further from home than she had ever been. She would travel for 5 days across a country she had only read about in books. At the end of that journey, she would meet a man she had never seen and children who might not want her there. It should have terrified her. Instead, for the first time in 5 years, Mary fell asleep smiling. The train pulled into Bear Valley Station on a cold Sunday afternoon in November. Mary pressed her face to the window and saw her first glimpse of Montana Territory. The sky seemed bigger than anything she had ever imagined, stretching endlessly in every direction. Mountains rose in the distance like sleeping giants, their peaks covered with snow. The station was nothing like the grand terminals she had seen in Chicago and Denver. It was just a small wooden building with a platform, surrounded by more open space than Mary had ever seen in her life. A few people waited on the platform, but she didn't know which one might be Robert Collins. Mary gathered her belongings, one trunk and a small traveling bag containing everything she owned, and stepped off the train. The air was so cold and clean it made her eyes water. She stood there for a moment, breathing in the sharp scent of pine trees and snow, feeling very small under the enormous sky. Mary Sullivan? She turned to see a tall man approaching her. He was older than she had expected, probably close to 40, with brown hair and kind eyes that looked tired. He wore a heavy coat and boots that had seen a lot of hard work. "Yes, I'm Mary," she said, extending her hand. Robert Collins took her hand in both of his and smiled. "Welcome to Montana Territory. I'm Robert. I can't tell you how glad I am that you came." He helped her load her trunk into a wagon, then handed her up to the seat beside him. As they drove away from the station, Mary got her first real look at the country that might become her home. The land rolled away from them in gentle hills covered with golden grass. Cattle dotted the landscape, their dark shapes standing out against the pale ground. "It's beautiful," Mary said, and she meant it. It was different from anything she had ever seen, wilder and more open, but there was something about it that made her feel peaceful. "Wait until you see it in spring," Robert said. "The whole valley turns green and wildflowers bloom everywhere." Caroline used to say it looked like God's garden. The mention of his first wife made them both quiet for a while. Mary wanted to ask about Carolyn, about what she had been like and how she had died, but it seemed too personal for a first conversation. Instead, she asked about the children. "Tell me about them. What are they like?" Robert's expression changed, becoming both proud and worried. "Rebecca is 14. She's been trying to be the mother of the family since Caroline died, and it's made her grow up too fast. She's protective of the others, especially the little ones. She might not trust you right away." "I understand," Mary said. "That's a lot of responsibility for someone so young." The twins are next, Annie and Alice. They're 10 years old and as different as night and day. Annie is quiet and thoughtful, but Alice is full of energy. They both miss their mother terribly. Then there's Daniel. He's 8 and he's been angry since Caroline died. He gets into fights, doesn't mind me like he used to. I think he blames me for not being able to save her." Mary nodded, thinking about how hard it must be for a young boy to understand death and loss. "Lucy is 6, and she's the sweetest child you'll ever meet, but she's been sad for so long. I sometimes worry she's forgotten how to be happy." And then there's William. He'll be 2 next month. He was born the day Caroline died, so he's never known what it's like to have a mother. By the time Robert finished describing his children, they had reached the ranch. Mary's first glimpse of Willow Creek Ranch took her breath away. The main house was larger than she had expected, built of logs with a wide front porch. Behind it stood a big red barn and several smaller buildings. Mountains rose up behind the ranch like a protective wall. But as they pulled up to the house, Mary's attention was caught by the 6 small faces pressed against the front windows. The children had been watching for their arrival. Robert helped her down from the wagon and carried her trunk to the porch. The front door opened, and the children filed out in order of age. Mary had seen many children in her life, but she had never seen any who looked quite so serious and guarded. Rebecca stepped forward first. She was tall for 14, with long brown hair and her father's kind eyes, but there was something careful and protective in the way she held herself. "Children," Robert said, "this is Mary Sullivan. She's come from Boston to meet us." "Hello," Mary said softly. "I'm very pleased to meet all of you." The children stared at her without saying anything. Mary could feel them studying her, trying to decide what kind of person she was and whether she would hurt them like the others had. Finally, Rebecca spoke. "How long are you planning to stay?" The question was direct and challenging. Mary could hear the pain behind it. This girl had watched 3 women come and go, promising to help and then leaving when things got difficult. "I'm hoping to stay permanently," Mary said honestly. "But I understand if you need time to decide whether you want me here." Rebecca's eyes narrowed slightly. "What makes you think you'll be different from the others?" "I don't know if I will be," Mary admitted. "I only know that I'm here because I want to be part of a family, not because I need a job or a temporary place to stay." Robert introduced the other children. The twins, Annie and Alice, stood close together watching Mary with curious eyes. Daniel, the 8-year-old, scowled at her and kicked at the wooden porch with his boot. 6-year-old Lucy hid behind Rebecca's skirt, peeking out occasionally to look at Mary. And little William, barely walking, clung to his father's leg and stared at Mary with wide blue eyes. "Mary must be tired from her journey," Robert said. "Rebecca, would you show her to the guest room? She can rest before dinner." Rebecca led Mary into the house, and Mary got her first look at what would hopefully become her home. The main room was large and comfortable with a big stone fireplace and handmade furniture. But she could see signs everywhere of a family struggling to take care of itself. Dishes were piled in the kitchen sink. Clothes were scattered around the room. Dust covered most surfaces. "This way," Rebecca said, leading Mary up a narrow staircase to a small room under the eaves. It was clean but sparse, with just a bed, a dresser, and a small window that looked out over the ranch. "Thank you," Mary said. "Rebecca, may I ask you something?" The girl turned in the doorway, her expression wary. "I know this is hard for you," Mary said, "having strangers come into your home, not knowing if they'll stay or go. I want you to know that I understand why you might not trust me yet." Rebecca studied her for a long moment. "The last woman who came here told us she was going to be our new mother. She said she would teach us things and take care of us. Then she left after 3 weeks because she said we were too much trouble." Mary's heart ached for these children who had been disappointed so many times. "I won't make you any promises I can't keep," she said. "But I will tell you this, I didn't come here because I needed work or a place to live. I came here because your father thought you might need me, and I thought I might need you too." For just a moment, Rebecca's careful mask slipped, and Mary saw the scared, overwhelmed child underneath. Then the mask was back in place. "Dinner is at 6, Rebecca said. "I'll call you when it's ready." After Rebecca left, Mary sat on the narrow bed and tried to process everything she had seen. The children were even more guarded than Robert had warned her they would be. Rebecca was carrying a burden no 14-year-old should have to bear. The younger children looked at her with a mixture of hope and fear that broke her heart. But there was something else she had noticed. Despite their wariness, despite their obvious pain, these children loved each other fiercely. She had seen it in the way Rebecca protected the younger ones, in how the twins stood together, in the way they all gathered around their father. This was a real family, fractured by loss, but held together by love. Mary had never been part of anything like it, and she wanted desperately to prove that she belonged here. Dinner that first night was a tense affair. The children sat around a large wooden table with Robert at one end and Mary at the other. Rebecca had cooked a simple meal of soup and bread, and Mary could tell the girl was proud of her cooking skills. "This is delicious," Mary said, and she meant it. "You're a wonderful cook, Rebecca." "Mama taught me," Rebecca said quietly. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Mary realized she had accidentally reminded everyone of their loss. "I'm sure she was a good teacher," Mary said gently, "and I can tell you've been taking good care of everyone." Rebecca looked surprised by the compliment. Mary guessed that most adults had focused on criticizing the children's behavior, rather than recognizing how hard Rebecca had been trying. After dinner, Mary offered to help with the dishes, but Rebecca firmly told her that was her job. Mary could see that the girl was determined to maintain control over her household responsibilities. Instead, Mary sat by the fire and watched the family's evening routine. Robert helped little William get ready for bed while Rebecca supervised the other children's bedtime preparations. It was clear that everyone had their roles and responsibilities. When it was time for the children to go to bed, they lined up to say goodnight to their father. Mary watched as Robert hugged each child and said something special to them. It was obvious how much he loved them, and how much they needed him. As the children headed upstairs, 6-year-old Lucy stopped in front of Mary. For a moment, the little girl just stared at her with solemn brown. Mary's first week at Willow Creek Ranch was the hardest 7 days of her life. Every morning she woke up determined to prove herself to the Collins family. Every night she went to bed feeling like she had failed. The children tested her in ways she hadn't expected. 8-year-old Daniel put a frog in her bed the second night. When she found it, instead of screaming, she gently caught it and released it outside. Daniel looked disappointed that his trick hadn't worked. 10-year-old Alice accidentally spilled milk all over the dress Mary was mending. When Mary simply cleaned it up without getting angry, Alice seemed confused. She had clearly expected to be scolded, but the hardest challenge came from Rebecca. The 14-year-old guarded her responsibilities like a mother lion protecting her cubs. When Mary tried to help with cooking, Rebecca told her the kitchen was too small for 2 people. When Mary offered to help with the younger children's baths, Rebecca said they were used to doing things a certain way. Mary understood what was happening. Rebecca had been the woman of the house for 2 years. She had kept her family together when everything fell apart. Now a stranger was coming in and threatening to take away the only purpose that had kept Rebecca going. After a week of being politely but firmly shut out of every household task, Mary knew she had to try a different approach. She found Rebecca one afternoon sitting on the front porch, mending a tear in little William's shirt. The girl's fingers moved quickly and expertly with the needle, but Mary could see the exhaustion in her face. "May I sit with you?" Mary asked. Rebecca nodded without looking up from her sewing. Mary sat down in the rocking chair next to Rebecca's. For a while they sat in comfortable silence, watching the afternoon sun paint the mountains gold. "You're very good at that," Mary said, nodding toward the shirt. "Your stitches are perfectly even." "Mama taught me," Rebecca said, as she always did when someone complimented her skills. "She must have been a wonderful teacher, and you must have been a good student." Rebecca glanced up at Mary, suspicious of the compliment. "Rebecca," Mary said gently, "can I tell you something about myself? About why I came here?" The girl shrugged, but Mary could tell she was listening. "When I was 17, my parents died in a fire," Mary began. "I was completely alone in the world. I had to learn how to take care of myself when I was just a little older than you are now." Rebecca's needle stopped moving. This was the first time Mary had shared anything personal about herself. It was terrifying. Mary continued, "I had to find work, find a place to live, learn how to manage money. I made so many mistakes, but I was proud too because I was surviving on my own. Then I got married," Mary said. "My husband David was a good man, but suddenly I wasn't taking care of just myself anymore. At first I felt like he was trying to take away my independence. I had worked so hard to learn how to manage on my own, and now someone else wanted to help me." Rebecca had put down her sewing completely now. She was staring at Mary with new interest. "It took me a long time to understand that letting someone help me didn't mean I was weak," Mary said. "It just meant I didn't have to carry everything alone anymore." The two sat in silence for a moment. Then Rebecca spoke quietly. "The other women who came here, they wanted to change everything. They said I was doing things wrong, that the house was a mess, that the children were wild. They made me feel like I had failed at everything." Mary's heart ached for this girl who had been trying so hard to hold her world together. "You haven't failed at anything," Mary said firmly. You've kept your family together for 2 years. You've made sure your brothers and sisters felt loved and safe. That's not failure, Rebecca. That's heroic. Tears started to form in Rebecca's eyes. But I don't know if I can keep doing it. I'm so tired all the time. And I want to be just a kid sometimes, but there's no one else to take care of everyone. What if there was someone else? Mary asked gently. What if you didn't have to do it all alone anymore? You mean you? Rebecca asked. I mean us, Mary said. Working together. You know this family better than anyone. You know what each child needs, what works and what doesn't. I don't want to take that away from you. I want to learn from you. Rebecca stared at her for a long moment. You really want me to teach you? More than anything, Mary said. I've never had children of my own. I don't know the first thing about being part of a family like this. But you do. You've been doing it for 2 years. For the first time since Mary had arrived, Rebecca smiled. It was small and uncertain, but it was real. Alice gets nightmares, Rebecca said quietly. She's afraid to tell Papa because she doesn't want to worry him. But if you sing to her, sometimes she can fall back asleep. What songs does she like? Mary asked. Mama used to sing Barbara Allen to her. I don't remember all the words, but Alice does. That night, when Alice woke up crying from a bad dream, Mary was ready. She went to the little girl's bedside and asked softly if she would like someone to sing to her. Alice looked surprised, but nodded. In a quiet voice, Mary began to sing the old ballad. When she got to parts she didn't remember, Alice whispered the words to her. When the song was finished, Alice was already falling back asleep. Will you sing to me again tomorrow night if I have another bad dream? She asked sleepily. Of course, Mary promised. The next morning, Alice shyly told Rebecca that Mary had sung to her. Rebecca looked at Mary with something that might have been approval. Slowly, other children began to test Mary in smaller ways. Daniel, the angry 8-year-old, discovered that Mary knew how to whittle. She had learned from her father years ago, and she offered to teach Daniel how to carve a wooden horse. At first, Daniel was suspicious, but as they sat together on the porch in the evenings working on their carving projects, he began to open up. He told Mary about how angry he was that his mother had died. He said it wasn't fair that babies got born and mothers got dead. Mary didn't try to give him easy answers. She just listened and agreed that it wasn't fair at all. 6-year-old Lucy was the next to warm up to Mary. The little girl had been sad for so long that her smiles had become rare and precious things. But Mary noticed that Lucy loved stories. Every evening after dinner, Mary began telling the children stories about her life in Boston, about the ships in the harbor and the big buildings and the people from all over the world. Lucy would creep closer and closer during story time, until finally she was sitting right next to Mary's chair. One evening, she climbed up into Mary's lap without saying anything. Mary's heart nearly burst with joy, but she just kept telling her story as if nothing had changed. The twins, Annie and Alice, presented different challenges. Annie was quiet and thoughtful, but she missed her mother desperately. She had kept one of her mother's handkerchiefs and she carried it with her everywhere. Mary found Annie crying over it one day, because the scent of her mother's perfume was starting to fade. Instead of trying to comfort Annie with words, Mary sat down beside her and cried too. It's hard when the things that remind us of people we love start to change, Mary said. But you know what? The love doesn't fade even when the scent does. Annie looked at Mary with surprise. None of the other adults had ever cried with her about missing her mother. Do you think Mama knows I still love her? Annie asked. I think she knows, Mary said. And I think she's proud of what a kind, caring person you're growing up to be. Alice, Annie's twin, was easier to win over but harder to handle. She was full of energy and mischief, always getting into trouble. Mary quickly learned that Alice responded better to being given jobs to do than to being told to stop causing problems. When Alice was restless, Mary would ask her to help gather eggs from the chickens or carry wood for the fireplace. Having important work to do made Alice feel useful instead of troublesome. Even little William, who barely remembered life before his mother died, began to warm up to Mary. At first, he would only go to his father or Rebecca when he was hurt or scared. But gradually he started coming to Mary too. When he took his first steps while holding onto Mary's hands, she felt like her heart might explode with pride and joy. Robert watched all of this happening with amazement. He had never seen his children open up to an outsider the way they were slowly opening up to Mary. More importantly, he had never seen them begin to heal from their grief. One evening in December, About 6 weeks after Mary's arrival, Robert found her sitting by the fire after the children had gone to bed. She was mending one of Daniel's shirts, her fingers moving skillfully with the needle. "You look like you belong here," he said quietly. Mary looked up at him with surprise. "Do I? The children are different since you came," Robert said. "They're starting to smile again, to laugh. Rebecca is acting like a 14-year-old instead of a worried mother. Daniel hasn't gotten into a fight in 2 weeks. Lucy is singing again." Mary felt tears prick her eyes. "They're wonderful children, Robert. They just needed time to trust that I wasn't going to leave." "What about us?" Robert asked. "Have you decided if this is where you want to stay?" Mary looked around the comfortable room, thought about the 6 children sleeping upstairs, remembered the way little William had reached for her that morning when he fell down. "I can't imagine being anywhere else," she said honestly. Robert smiled. "Then maybe it's time we made this official. Mary Sullivan, will you marry me?" 3 years had passed since Mary first stepped off the train in Bear Valley, and the Willow Creek Ranch had become everything she had never dared to dream it could be. The house that had once felt chaotic and sad now rang with laughter, and the comfortable sounds of a family that had learned to be whole again. Mary stood at the kitchen window on a bright spring morning, watching her children play in the yard. At 17, Rebecca had blossomed into a confident young woman who helped run the household but also had time to be young. She was teaching 13-year-old Alice how to braid her hair in the latest style they had seen in a magazine from town. 12-year-old Annie sat under the big oak tree, reading a book to 5-year-old William, who was now a chattering little boy with his father's kind eyes and his own stubborn streak. 11-year-old Daniel was working with Robert in the barn, learning how to repair harnesses and care for the horses. 9-year-old Lucy was in the garden with Mary, carefully tending the vegetables they had planted together. The little girl who had been so sad when Mary first arrived now hummed while she worked, her face bright with contentment. "Mama Mary," Lucy called, using the name all the children had eventually settled on. "The tomatoes are getting big." "They certainly are," Mary agreed, coming outside to admire Lucy's work. "You've done such a good job taking care of them." The word mama still filled Mary's heart with joy every time she heard it. It had taken months for the children to start calling her that naturally, and she had never pushed them. But gradually, one by one, they had begun to see her not as a replacement for their first mother, but as their mother now. Robert came up from the barn with Daniel trailing behind him. At 14, Daniel had grown tall and strong, and the anger that had once consumed him had faded into the normal energy of a teenage boy. He had his father's steady temperament and his mother Caroline's fierce loyalty to family. "The new colt is doing well," Robert told Mary, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Daniel thinks we should name him Thunder." "That sounds like a perfect name," Mary said, leaning back against her husband. After 3 years of marriage, she still sometimes marveled at how natural it felt to be part of this family. "Mrs. Collins?" A voice called from the front of the house. Mary turned to see Mrs. Patterson, one of their neighbors from town, walking up the path with her daughter Helen. Helen was about Rebecca's age, and the two girls had become good friends. "Good morning, Mrs. Patterson," Mary called. "Helen, Rebecca is just around front." But as the women approached, Mary could see that Mrs. Patterson looked uncomfortable. She was wringing her hands and glancing around nervously. "Mrs. Collins," Mrs. Patterson said quietly, "I hope you don't mind me coming by, but I wanted to ask you something." "Of course," Mary said. "Would you like to come inside for some coffee?" "Oh no, thank you," Mrs. Patterson said quickly. Well, you see, my sister is coming to visit from back east and she's bringing her daughter. The girl is 18 and unmarried, and my sister is hoping to find her a husband out here." Mary nodded politely, wondering what this had to do with her. "The thing is," Mrs. Patterson continued, looking even more uncomfortable, "my sister heard about your situation, about how you came here as a mail-order bride and about your inability to have children of your own." Mary felt her back stiffen. Even after 3 years, there were still people who whispered about her, who saw her as somehow defective because she couldn't bear children. "She said some things that weren't very kind," Mrs. Patterson went on, "about how it wasn't natural for a barren woman to raise other people's children, about how those poor Collins children needed a real mother." Mary felt Robert's hands tighten on her waist. She could sense his anger building, but she put her hand over his to calm him. "I see," Mary said quietly. "And what did you tell your sister?" Mrs. Patterson's face turned red. Well, I told her she was talking nonsense, of course. I told her that anyone with eyes could see that those Collins children are the happiest, most well-cared-for children in the whole territory. I told her that you've done more for this family than any blood mother could have done. Mary felt tears prick her eyes. Mrs. Patterson had always been kind, but hearing such a strong defense of her family meant more than she could say. I just wanted you to know, Mrs. Patterson continued, that not everyone feels the way my sister does. Most folks around here think Robert Collins is the luckiest man in Montana Territory to have found a wife like you. Before Mary could respond, a small voice piped up from behind her. What's a barren woman? Little William asked. He had wandered over during the conversation and was looking up at the adults with curious eyes. Mary's heart sank. This was not a conversation she had wanted her children to overhear, but before she could answer, Rebecca appeared around the corner of the house. At 17, she had grown into a young woman with strong opinions and little patience for gossip. A barren woman, Rebecca said clearly, is what ignorant people call someone who can't have babies of her own. But those people don't understand that being a real mother has nothing to do with giving birth. It has to do with love and sacrifice and being there every single day. Mary stared at her oldest daughter in amazement. Rebecca continued speaking, her voice growing stronger. Mama Mary is more of a real mother than some women who have a dozen children of their own. She chose to love us when she didn't have to. She stayed when things were hard. She helped us heal when we thought we'd never be happy again. By now, all the other children had gathered around, drawn by the sound of Rebecca's passionate speech. That's right, Alice said fiercely. Mama Mary taught me how to braid my hair and how to cook apple pie and how to be brave when I'm scared. She sings to me when I have bad dreams, Annie added quietly. She taught me how to carve and how to be patient when I'm angry, Daniel said. She tells the best stories, Lucy chimed in. Little William, who didn't fully understand the conversation but could sense the mood, wrapped his arms around Mary's legs. Mama Mary is the best mama in the whole world, he declared. Mrs. Patterson was wiping tears from her eyes. You see, she said to Mary, this is exactly what I told my sister. Blood doesn't make a family, love does. After Mrs. Patterson and Helen left, Mary found herself sitting on the front porch with her family gathered around her. The spring evening was warm and peaceful, with the mountains glowing pink in the setting sun. I'm sorry you had to hear that, Mary told the children. I know it must have been confusing. It wasn't confusing, Rebecca said firmly. It was just stupid. Some people think the only way to be a real mother is to give birth to your children, but we know better. We sure do, Robert said, pulling Mary closer to him. Your mother, both of your mothers, loved you completely. Caroline gave you life and Mary gave you hope and healing. You're lucky enough to have been loved by two wonderful women. Tell us about Mama Caroline again, William asked. Even though he had no memories of his birth mother, he loved hearing stories about her. So Mary, as she had done many times before, told the children stories about their first mother. She told them about Caroline's laugh and her gentle hands and how much she had loved each of them. She had long ago stopped feeling threatened by Caroline's memory. Instead, she felt honored to carry on the love that Caroline had started. As the stars came out over the Montana sky, the family gradually drifted inside for the evening routine that had become so natural over the years. Mary helped William get ready for bed while Rebecca and the twins cleaned up the kitchen. Robert and Daniel secured the barn for the night. Later, as Mary and Robert lay in bed, they talked about the day's events. It still bothers people, Mary said quietly. The fact that I can't have children of my own. It bothers people who don't understand what family really means, Robert replied. But look at our children, Mary. Look at how happy they are, how confident and kind and strong. If that's not proof of good mothering, I don't know what is. Mary thought about the children sleeping peacefully in their beds down the hall. Rebecca, who had learned to trust again and was planning to marry the young man from the neighboring ranch. Annie and Alice, who had grown from grief-stricken little girls into thoughtful, joyful young women. Daniel, who had channeled his anger into determination and was talking about studying law. Lucy, whose sweetness and optimism brightened every day. And William, who would grow up never knowing a time when he wasn't completely loved and wanted. Do you ever regret it? Mary asked. Marrying a woman who couldn't give you more children? Robert turned to face her in the darkness. Mary Collins, you gave me everything I needed. You gave me my children back. You gave me a home instead of just a house. You gave me love and partnership and hope for the future. What more could any man want? Mary smiled in the darkness. I love you, Robert Collins. I love you too, Mrs. Collins, forever. The next morning brought news that would test the family's bonds in a new way. A letter arrived from Boston with official-looking seals and serious language. Mary's first husband's distant relatives had somehow learned about her new life and were questioning whether she was a fit guardian for children. Given her unnatural situation, the family gathered around the kitchen table as Robert read the letter aloud.